Hello there, I'm Jane and welcome to my YouTube channel, and of course, my messy little sewing corner. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. This video is a continuation of the video I released last month detailing how I'm hand sewing a middle-class Tudor gown. While in the last video I covered the bodice and sleeves, this one will focus on the skirt, assembling stuff together, and adding trim. If you haven't watched my last video yet, I recommend going back and doing that. Not just because it helps me and my channel, but also because you're going to be really confused when I jump right into the middle of this process without seeing all the context that comes before it. It's like starting a season of a TV show right in the middle. It won't make sense. But if you're chaotic like that and you enjoy some healthy rebellion, then who am I to stop you? And with that, let's jump right back in. Okay, so the first step is to get out the fabric and cut the panels for the skirt. This is Molly's favorite part. Since I'm an ADHD queen, I didn't realize that the front panel should be slightly narrow at the top, but by the time I realized, I had already finished the dress. So next time, I guess. And I'm going to do the same thing with the lining panels. I'm just using some cotton muslin fabric. The lining would be linen if I'd cared about complete historical reproduction, but muslin is also a natural fiber and rather cheap, so I would call this material historically adjacent. Then I gotta sew these panels together, and I'm going to use a running back stitch for that. The front skirt seam is a little shorter, starting about 10 inches from the top to make sure I can pull the dress over my hips. A running back stitch is just a running stitch, except every 3 to 5 stitches I do a single back stitch. This is awesome because it's a bit stronger than running stitch alone, but really fast to do. I've actually seen quite a few skirts and dresses from many periods on the internet.com that only use running stitch for their long seams. I guess people in the past valued efficiency and time-saving measures too. I like to finish these long seams by doing a few back stitches to make sure that the stitching remains secure. Then I'm pressing these seams open with an iron. Ironing is boring, so this part is short. After the seams are all pressed, it's time to attach the skirt lining. I did this the modern way by backstitching the 2 layers right sides together along the top edge and then turned the tube I created inside out so that the right sides were facing outwards. And then there's more ironing. Gotta roll back the lining a little bit, about 1/8 of an inch, to make sure no one ever sees it. The correct historical reproduction way to do this would be to put the layers with the wrong sides together, and then turn the seam allowances on the top edge and the hem edge in between, like a little fabric sandwich, and then stitch them down with a hem stitch or fell stitch. But the modern way is a bit easier to handle for me, and since I'll be pleating the top edge in a minute, I want the seam to be very durable. The last bit is to secure the front opening with a running stitch and a buttonhole bar at the bottom for a little extra reinforcement. Next is pleating time. I'm knife pleating the front and sides, and with all the extra in the back, I'm going to do cartridge pleats. I don't know if this is historically correct. This is just how it seemed to make sense to me. Knife pleats are easy though. I use a metal ruler, which is about 1 inch wide, to bring 1 ruler's width of fabric on top of a bottom layer that is also about 1 ruler's width wide. Then I make sure all 3 layers inside that single knife pleat line up, and then it's pinned and ironed in place. When all the pleats are done, the top is whip stitched to keep all the pleats stable. This is my first time doing actual cartridge pleats, but they were actually really easy to do. First, I measured out 2 lines of dots, with each dot about 1 inch away from the last, with the first row about 1/4 of the way down from the top edge, and the second row about 1/2 of an inch down. Using an especially sturdy thread, I sewed 2 rows of running stitches along the dots, making sure the 2 stitching lines were as perfectly aligned as I could manage. Then these rows of stitches are tightened up by pulling on each side of the thread, making a really even section of gathering. The thread is tied off and they're all done. After I finished the pleating, I thought of a few other ways to do it, but I really needed to stop working on this dress for a little while after I finished it the first time. It actually took me about, I think I did the math, and I had about 20 hours of footage, which wasn't even everything, so it must have been about 40 hours of work, at least. If the pleating situation really bothers me later on, the nice part about lining the bodice and the skirt separately is that I can just detach the bodice from the skirt while wasting some thread, but without too much trouble. That way I can easily take out the cartridge and knife pleats, do a different pleating arrangement, and then reattach the skirt to the bodice. It'll be fine. Next up is probably the most fun part. This gown would have looked lovely without trim, and many clothes do fine without trim. But while good construction is like salt in a recipe, making everything the best it could possibly be, trim is a dash of cinnamon you put in brownies to enhance the taste of the chocolate. In my opinion, trim spices things up. It can make clothing look more lavish, loved, refined, and honestly truly complete. The trim I'm using consists of 3 types: 1/2 inch black velvet, 1 1/2 inch black velvet, and a bunch of finger loop braid I made with metallic gold crochet thread. I'm starting with the 1/2 inch velvet and applying that to the seam lines of the bodice, as well as around the front and back necklines. There are a few videos and a lot of instructions online about how to make finger loop braids. If you're interested, I used a 5-loop flat braid. I'm doing this with a running stitch. I think there's a different name for it, but basically I'm just doing a running stitch where the stitches visible over the trim on top are very small and the stitches on the back of the bodice are longer. Maybe it's called prick stitching or top stitching, I just know that it works well for applying this kind of trim. And secondly, if I were really organized, I would have added the bodice's trim to the outside of the fashion fabric before attaching the lining, or removed parts of the lining and re-enclose them so that the ends of the trim are sandwiched between the layers. But that's just not how it went down this time. I'm also applying velvet trim to the bottom band of the puff sleeves. It also gets some gold trim. Originally, I tried a couching technique for further ornamentation instead of the trim, basically just sewing over one long piece of the gold crochet thread with a much thinner gold sewing thread, but it took a really long time and it looked really sloppy. So I just ripped it out and tried something else. The gold finger loop braids were sewn to the middle of the 1/2 inch black velvet tape with a longer back stitch. I think it looks really nice, especially for a do-it-yourself solution. However, one part didn't look so nice. The joins around the front neckline just looked a bit weird and sloppy, so I grabbed some spare faux pearls I had in my stash and stitched those in a little cluster on top of the join. This way, it's covered up and distracts from it unless you're inspecting the right spot with a magnifying glass, which is totally fine with me. From what I understand, gold embellishing was very popular. Sumptuary laws prohibited cloth of gold or silver for most, except for the very wealthy and landed. And of course, since white symbolized purity, Queen Elizabeth is seen dripping with them in many portraits. First, I'm going to attach the sleeves to the bodice. For the first step, I'm setting the sleeves in with a back stitch. Then I'll remove any visible basting stitches left over on the outside and trim the long parts of the seam allowance down. Then to seal the seam in and finish it, I'm going to take a strip of the linen rayon fabric, cut on the straight grain because bias strips were wasteful and weren't often used in this period, and then ironing the folds into it, almost like the double fold bias tape you get in the store. To fully encase the seam, also one edge fold down with a back stitch. The rest of the strip is folded over the seam to the other side, making sure no raw edges of fabric are exposed anywhere. This edge is sewn down with a felling stitch. And after repeating this on the other side, the sleeves are fully on. The bodice is then carefully aligned with the skirt, making sure that the waist of the bodice and the waist of the skirt match up as exactly as possible. I'm pinning these with clips because the layers of fabric are so thick that I think I would just end up bending my pins. Next, the knife pleated sections on each side are attached with a whip stitch and strong top stitching thread, leaving the back alone for now. The cartridge pleats are also attached with a whip stitch, but only at the top of each little fold. This makes the cartridge pleats stand out a little more, creating the wider skirt top silhouette that was prized in this era. Even though the gown is now fully assembled, another important finishing touch is to sew on a closure. While I could have just used dress pins to close it however I needed to on whatever given day, I'm using large hooks and eyes spaced about 1/2 of an inch apart in an alternating pattern on each side to make the closure more secure. This is a very common technique for most garments using hooks and eyes until the rise of alternate closure hardware. I have to admit, I made a Spanish farthingale very quickly, in about 3 days, and completely by machine, to see if I could hem the skirt to wear it over a farthingale, but it didn't quite work out. Either my farthingale was off or the skirt just wasn't cut long enough to begin with to work. So instead, I sewed together a medium-sized bum roll, which is basically just a crescent-shaped pillow with strings on it that tie around the waist, which should create a less dramatic but somewhat similar effect. Okay, so partial reveal. I got the gown on my dress form now because she's a little wrinkled. She was, hanging out for a little bit while I was working on some other stuff, but now we gotta work on this hem. I set the dress form to be the same height as me, more or less, and I did try it on a little while ago and got my fiance to mark out the proper hem, I believe. So now I'm just gonna go around and start hemming so I can add on the rest of the trim on the bottom. Oh my. Wait. Okay, so there's a bum roll on, but she's a little lopsided right now, I think. But you know what, it's fine. I'll fix it and I'll go around and I will be hemming. After marking the hem out on my dress form over the bum roll, I'm ironing the hem up and sewing on some twill tape, using it as hem tape to fully enclose the hem edge. I'm sewing one line of running stitches near the bottom and then another up top. Then I'm flipping the skirt over to the right side and attaching the final bit of 1 1/2 inch black velvet trim to the hem so it lines up with the bottom edge. I'm sewing this on just as I did with the other trim on the bodice. The only difference here is that the bottom edge is done with a whip stitch instead of another running stitch. I chose to do the hem this way to create a little stiffness so it widens the bottom of the skirt ever so slightly. This will help with preventing the hem from narrowing as it flows down because this linen is kind of a drapey fabric. Hello! This is the final reveal. This is how my first hand-sewn gown turned out. I had it over a bum roll, which is, she's right here. I think I might have made her wrong, either too wide at the sides or just not wide enough at the back, but she struggles, man. She was struggling under the layer of the kirtle and the gown, so I took her off because I think it looks a little bit better for the moment like this. She's a little long, a little longer in the back to accommodate the bum roll, but I could probably still wear her out and it would probably be okay. She's very princessy, swirly, skirty. There's a lot of skirt. She's actually pretty heavy. As you can see, the cartridge pleats in the back, they don't really stick out because the fabric is too drapey, but you know, I specifically designed her to go over this kirtle, which I think works well. The only thing that I think she really needs from here is some sleeves that will lace up to my kirtle straps to cover the shift, because any lady in the Tudor era worth their salt would not have their underwear showing. It's sort of like, I mean, not that we care about bra straps anymore in 2022, but it's kind of like the bra strap of the 16th and 17th century. So yeah, this is how she turned out. I'm really happy. I'm gonna make another one probably immediately, whatever, you know, I can't stop. Please send help. But yeah, this is how she turned out. The puff sleeves are probably my favorite part. I think they look so good, and I'm like, I might even make like modern special occasion clothes with these kinds of sleeves because they're just like so good, so good. So yeah, this is she. No farthingale. That didn't work out, I don't think. So yeah, this is what she looks like. Hi again. I know I just did the final reveal and everything, but I have a couple more things I wanted to say before, you know, I close out the video. I think for my first gown, this couldn't have gone any better. And I know I already said this, but I probably will end up, you know, deconstructing some parts of it and putting it back together in a slightly different way. I'm really happy with it for the moment, and I have so many other projects I want to do. See the white whiteboard over there? Yeah, that's my project to-do list. So I'm probably going to move on to other stuff. Maybe I'll make a video about how I reconstruct this dress in a few ways to make it slightly improved, or just improve it slightly. And I know I already said this in my final reveal portion, but I will be making some sets of sleeves to go over the shift sleeves in a video soon-ish. I have a few other things that I've been working on that I really want to share, and I'm really excited to show everyone. So the sleeves, not my first priority. I might have seemed a little critical of myself throughout this video, but I don't really read it as criticism. I'm just, you know, like when you're writing a research paper, you constantly evaluate the authenticity and, you know, authority of your sources, and that's kind of what I was doing, just constantly evaluating myself, making mental notes for what to do differently the next time, that sort of thing. There are a few big things I think I would like to do differently next time though that I haven't already said, and there's like 3 big ones, right? So first thing I should have done is I should have used wool instead of linen blend. I probably should have saved this fabric for a lining. I know I said that this was kind of, in my last video, that this is just what was sort of affordable for me, and that's kind of true. But I managed to snag some more affordable wool fabric, and I'm going to do something with that, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Number 2, I should have included more seam allowance on my puff sleeves, because I guess when I was pattern drafting, I left off about 1/2 inch in a couple places, and I think it would have been much easier to sew, and it would have lined up better, and it would have been puffier if I had included that either while cutting or in the actual pattern itself. So if I do, not if, trust me, not if, when I do these again, I will be adding that seam allowance and seeing what happens. So that's number 2. Number 3 is a repeat, and I know I already said it in the video, but I'm gonna say it again because I am full of regret. And that is that I should have applied the the velvet trim before I sewed the lining on. I should have done that. I realized that. I've learned from my mistakes. And next time I make a gown with trim, I will be putting that on before attaching the lining. Trust you me. So those are the 3 things I would have done differently if I were to just go back in time and do this all over again, but I'm not redoing it now that I've already done it, just to be clear. Back to that wool I said I had in my stash. It's a really pretty dark green color that I look really good in, so I want to make something really great with it. Except for I'm plagued by indecision, so I can't decide if I want to make a doublet in skirt or another gown like this one. So a doublet is like, it's basically a jacket, and the skirt is, it's a skirt. You know what a skirt looks like. But I can't decide which one I want to make more. So leave me a comment, tell me if you want a doublet and a skirt, or if you want another gown, because you are a valued viewer and I appreciate you watching my videos, and I also need engagement for the algorithm. There is a link to the book I used for pattern and process for this gown in the description if that interests you. I have some exciting videos coming up, which include 18th century stays, an Elizabethan pair of bodies, and a couple silk gowns. If you really love this video, or maybe just hang out with me, you can buy me a coffee on my Ko-Fi page, which is linked in my description as well. I do my best to upload on the 3rd Friday of every month, though that may become more often soon, just depending on how busy I am and other projects I have going on. But I mean, if you click that little bell right next to the subscribe button and, turn on all notifications, you'll know. You'll know as soon as I start releasing videos more often, or, just my monthly video or whatever, you'll know. You'll be in on it. So it's your choice. Okay, I think that's everything I have to say. Thank you so much for watching, for liking, commenting, subscribing, ringing that little bell. I appreciate it all. It really helps me out. I will see you next time. Bye.